The red carpet was supposed to be effortless, a controlled illusion of glamour, practiced smiles, polished answers, and camera flashes choreographed as tightly as any stage performance. Taehyung stepped onto the carpet with that familiar calm that fans mistook for ease, but which actually came from years of learning how to breathe through noise. The flashes ignited instantly, sharp and relentless, popping like distant fireworks. Reporters called his name from every direction. Taehyung turned slightly, offering a measured smile, shoulders relaxed, posture immaculate. He had done this 100 times before. He knew where to look, how long to pause, when to move. Then a voice cut through the polished chaos. "Smile properly." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Taehyung felt it before he fully registered the words, a subtle shift in the air, like the temperature dropping without warning. The man stood too close, dressed in an expensive gray suit that blended seamlessly with the crowd of industry figures who believed proximity gave them permission. His tone carried amusement, the kind that assumed entitlement. Or is your fame still riding on Jungkook's name? For half a second, the red carpet froze. Taehyung's feet stayed planted on the velvet beneath him, the fabric warm from the lights overhead. His smile didn't disappear. It tightened, just enough. Cameras swarmed closer, lenses adjusting, shutters snapping faster, hungry for micro-reactions that could be replayed frame by frame. The man leaned in slightly, confident. Microphones hovered between them like witnesses pretending neutrality. Taehyung didn't answer. He had learned long ago that reactions were currency, and silence, when controlled, could be its own shield. His fingers curled subtly at his side, nails pressing into his palm, grounding himself in the sting of reality. The crowd wouldn't notice that his breathing had shifted, that the air felt thinner now. They rarely did. Behind him, Jungkook heard the change before he saw it. He had been a few steps back, responding to a reporter with a laugh that faded mid-breath when he sensed something was wrong. Years of stages and unscripted moments had sharpened his instincts. He turned just in time to catch the flicker in Taehyung's eyes, brief but unmistakable. "Did he just?" Jungkook muttered under his breath, already moving. The man spoke again, smile widening. "Relax, I'm just saying what people think." That was when Jungkook stepped forward. "Take a step back," Jungkook said, his voice even, controlled but edged with something unmistakably firm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Cameras pivoted instantly, drawn to the shift like predators sensing movement. The man laughed lightly, feigning surprise. "And you are?" "Someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect," Jungkook replied, gaze steady. He could feel his pulse climbing, the familiar heat of anger rising despite his effort to keep it buried. He glanced back briefly, checking Taehyung without turning fully away. A silent question. Taehyung gave the smallest nod, not because he was fine, but because he didn't want this to escalate. Too late. From the edge of the carpet, Taehyung's manager whispered urgently, but Taehyung barely heard him. His attention was locked on the man's expression, the way arrogance flickered into irritation at being challenged. "Disrespect," the man scoffed. "Please, he wouldn't even be standing here without." "Finish that sentence." Taehyung's voice cut through the noise, low and sharp, vibrating with something raw that refused to stay buried. Heads turned. Even the cameras hesitated, as if aware they were trespassing on something volatile. The man blinked. "I didn't mean." "You did," Taehyung said, stepping forward now. His eyes were dark, unreadable, carrying years of restraint worn thin. "You always do." The red carpet suddenly felt too narrow, too exposed, stripped of its illusion. Whispers rippled through the crowd like electricity. Jungkook shifted slightly closer to Taehyung, a quiet show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the lenses closing in. Taehyung felt Jungkook's presence like an anchor, and that somehow made it harder to stay silent. "You think you can talk like that because there are cameras," Taehyung continued, his voice rising despite himself. He hated this part of him, the part that burned hot and fast, the part he usually kept hidden behind artistry and charm. Say it again without them. Reporters leaned forward, microphones thrust closer, breath held. This was no longer a routine appearance. This was becoming something else entirely. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. Wow, touchy. Guess the rumors hit a nerve. That was it. Enough. The word tore out of Taehyung, echoing across the carpet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the flashes slowed, stunned by the sudden shift. Taehyung turned abruptly, jaw clenched so tightly it ached, and stormed off the red carpet without looking back. Shouts followed him, his name, questions, warnings. He ignored them all. Each step away from the carpet felt heavier than the last, anger pounding through him with a truth he rarely admitted out loud. He was tired. Tired of watching people he cared about reduced to narratives. Tired of being polite in the face of calculated disrespect. Tired of pretending words didn't cut when they were designed to. The moment he disappeared backstage, the noise surged back like a wave crashing into shore. Jungkook exhaled slowly and turned back toward the carpet, forcing calm into his expression as security moved in and damage control began. He glanced once in the direction Taehyung had gone, worry flashing briefly across his face before he masked it again. The headlines were already writing themselves. Backstage, Taehyung stood alone in a dim corridor that smelled of cold air and metal. His hands shook despite his effort to steady them. He pressed his palm against the wall, breathing hard, anger slowly giving way to something quieter and more dangerous. Regret. The door at the end of the corridor slammed shut, the echo ringing through the space like a final punctuation mark. The corridor felt narrower the longer Taehyung stood there, the hum of distant music bleeding through the walls like a reminder that the night was still moving without him. He dragged a hand through his hair, breath uneven, the heat in his chest refusing to cool. He hated that the man's words had landed, hated that they had found a crack. Footsteps approached, fast but controlled. "You can't just disappear like that," Jungkook said, voice tight, not loud but strained. Everyone's scrambling. Taehyung didn't turn. "Let them." Jungkook stopped a few steps away. The silence between them was heavy, packed with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Jungkook sighed. "They're already pulling clips, the part before you walked off." That got him. Taehyung straightened slowly, jaw flexing as he turned. "What are they saying?" "Some are defending you," Jungkook said carefully. "Some are saying you lost control." He hesitated, then added, "And my name's already in it." Taehyung's chest tightened. "I didn't want that." "I know," Jungkook met his eyes, "but that doesn't matter to the internet." A manager appeared at the end of the hallway, phone glued to his ear, face pale. He mouthed something urgent and gestured for them to come. Taehyung shook his head once. "Not yet." The manager hesitated, then backed away, already fielding another call. Jungkook stepped closer. "Are you okay?" Taehyung laughed under his breath, sharp and humorless. "I will be, eventually." The word eventually hung between them, like a promise neither fully trusted. Minutes later, they were ushered into a small backstage room meant for quick touch-ups, not crisis control. The lighting was harsh, unflattering, stripping away the armor of stage polish. Taehyung caught his reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the tension staring back at him. "They want statements," the manager said, finally off the phone. "Short ones, neutral, calm. We emphasize misunderstanding." Taehyung's eyes flicked to him. "No." A pause. "Excuse me." "I'm not apologizing for being insulted," Taehyung said evenly. "And I'm not pretending it didn't happen." The manager rubbed his temples. "This isn't about pride. Brands are watching. Sponsors are already nervous." Jungkook shifted beside him, uncomfortable but present. "If you force this quiet, it'll blow up anyway." The manager exhaled slowly. "There's already a leak." Taehyung felt the floor tilt. What leak? A clip, the manager said. Not just the shouting, the comment before it, it's trending. For a moment, no one spoke. Taehyung sat down hard on the edge of the couch. The room felt too bright, too small. He had spent years controlling his image with precision, and in one night, someone else had decided to test how far they could push him for entertainment. What do you want to do? Jungkook asked quietly. Taehyung looked up. Something resolute settled behind his eyes. I want to tell the truth. The manager stiffened. That's risky. So is silence, Taehyung replied, and silence never protected anyone. Hours later, long after the event had ended, Taehyung sat in a plain room with a single camera set up in front of him. No stylists, no filters, just white walls and unforgiving light. Jungkook stood off to the side, arms crossed, tension etched into his posture. The camera light blinked on. This isn't an apology, Taehyung began, voice steady but carrying the weight of the night. It's an explanation. He spoke about the comment, about how familiar it was to have his work reduced to proximity, his effort dismissed as borrowed relevance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He let the words sit where they belonged. When he finished, Jungkook stepped forward, hesitation flickering across his face before he spoke. I stepped in because disrespect doesn't become acceptable just because it's subtle. I won't apologize for that. The recording ended. The room felt lighter and heavier all at once. The response was immediate. Support poured in alongside criticism. Fans argued. Commentators dissected expressions, tone, posture. Some called it brave. Others called it reckless. But the narrative cracked, splintering into versions that no longer fully belonged to anyone. Later that night, Taehyung sat alone in his apartment, shoes kicked off, jacket draped over a chair. The city glowed beyond the window, distant and indifferent. His phone buzzed relentlessly. He ignored it, staring instead at his reflection in the glass, stripped of stage lights and expectation. A knock sounded. He opened the door to find Jungkook, hoodie pulled low, eyes tired. Just checking, he said. You alive? Taehyung smirked faintly, barely. They sat on the floor, backs against the couch, silence settling comfortably this time. They're calling it a meltdown, Jungkook said after a while. Some outlets anyway. Taehyung nodded. They always do. And some are calling it overdue. That made him pause. The next morning hit harder than the night before. Notifications stacked faster than he could read them. Praise, hate, threats disguised as concern, unknown numbers telling him to be grateful, to behave, to remember his place. The kettle screamed in the kitchen as if offended by the hour. Taehyung poured water over coffee grounds he barely tasted and leaned against the counter, breathing through the familiar bitterness. Another knock. This time it was his manager, exhaustion etched deep. We've got a situation. Taehyung didn't look up. Define situation. An outlet claims the man from last night is considering legal action, the manager said. Defamation. Taehyung laughed once hollow. For insulting me. He's saying your response damaged his reputation. And mine was. The manager didn't answer. He didn't need to. They also want follow-up statements, he continued. Softer, emphasize misunderstanding. No, Taehyung said again, firmer now. A pause stretched thin and dangerous. If you push this, the manager warned, there will be consequences. Taehyung's hand trembled slightly around his mug, but his voice didn't. There already are. By noon, the fallout was impossible to ignore. Headlines multiplied. Panels debated his temperament. Old clips resurfaced, reframed as evidence of instability that hadn't existed until someone decided it did. That afternoon, as Taehyung stepped into a waiting car flanked by security, reporters shouted over one another. Do you regret it? Is Jungkook influencing your decisions? Are you losing control? Taehyung stopped. The crowd quieted, surprised. "I regret that standing up for yourself is treated like a scandal," he said calmly. "And I regret how profitable that reaction is for some of you." They ushered him into the car before the questions could sharpen. Inside, the silence finally broke him. His hands shook as the adrenaline drained away. Jungkook reached over and squeezed his hand once, grounding, steady. "Fear doesn't mean you're wrong," Jungkook said softly. Taehyung stared out the window as the city blurred past. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. He wasn't sure what this would cost him. But for the first time in a long time, he knew one thing clearly. He wasn't going to let someone else tell his story for him. The agency building had always felt sterile to Taehyung, but that afternoon it felt hostile. Glass walls, neutral colors, polite smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. He sat at the long conference table with his hands folded, listening as executives spoke about him as if he weren't in the room. "Brand safety is the concern," one of them said smoothly. "This isn't about right or wrong, it's about stability." Taehyung lifted his gaze. Stability for who? A brief, uncomfortable pause followed. Someone cleared their throat. The industry reacts best when emotions are contained. Contained, the word echoed in his head. Jungkook, seated a few chairs away, shifted slightly. Taehyung noticed it, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the restraint. Jungkook had learned this language too well. Smile, nod, survive. "So what are you suggesting?" Taehyung asked. "A hiatus," another executive said. "Let things cool down a few months, quiet appearances, limited communication." "You're benching me," Taehyung replied. "We're protecting you." "No," Taehyung said calmly. "You're protecting yourselves." No one contradicted him. When the meeting ended, Taehyung walked out without waiting for further instructions. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, threatening rain. Jungkook caught up to him near the curb. "They can't just sideline you like this," Jungkook said, frustration finally breaking through. "They already have," Taehyung replied. He laughed softly, brittle. "They think this will scare me back into silence." Jungkook studied him. "Is it working?" Taehyung didn't answer right away. The truth was messier than he wanted to admit. Part of him was exhausted. Part of him wanted to disappear, to let the noise burn itself out without him in the middle of it. And another part of him was furious. That night, rain hammered against the windows of Taehyung's apartment. His phone lay face down on the table, buzzing occasionally like a trapped insect. Messages from fans blurred together with warnings from management. Support and condemnation tangled into something overwhelming. Jungkook sat on the couch, hoodie pulled tight, watching Taehyung pace. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said. "I do," Taehyung replied, stopping abruptly. "If I hesitate, they'll take control again." Jungkook exhaled. "What are you thinking?" Taehyung picked up his phone, turning it over in his hand. "I want to go live." Jungkook froze. "Now?" "Yes." Silence fell heavy between them. Jungkook searched his face, reading the resolve there, the exhaustion, the quiet determination. Finally, he nodded. "Then I'm here." Taehyung set up the camera with hands that shook more than he wanted them to. The screen lit up. The viewer count climbed faster than his heartbeat. "Hi," he said simply. He didn't perform. He didn't polish. He spoke about the comment on the red carpet, about how familiar it was to have his work diminished, about the pressure to always be graceful in the face of disrespect. His voice cracked once, and he didn't hide it. "I'm scared," Taehyung admitted, "but I'm more scared of becoming someone who stayed silent just to survive." Comments flooded in too fast to read. Hearts, arguments, disbelief, gratitude. When he ended the stream, the room felt hollow and electric all at once. "I think I made it worse," Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook shook his head. "You made it real." The consequences came fast. Statements from sponsors appeared within hours. Some distanced themselves. Others surprised everyone by standing with him publicly. The industry fractured, lines drawn sharply and publicly. Days later, during an award rehearsal, Taehyung walked into a room that went quiet. Whispers followed him like shadows. He's trouble. He's fearless. He won't last. Jungkook joined him, grinning faintly. Missed this. Taehyung smirked, but his chest felt tight. That night on stage, Taehyung presented an award. His hands trembled as he stepped into the spotlight. Applause rolled over him, uneven but loud enough to matter. He scanned the crowd and found Jungkook, nodding once, grounding him. This industry taught me how to smile, Taehyung said into the microphone, voice steady now. But it didn't teach me how to be honest. I had to learn that myself. The applause that followed wasn't unanimous. But it was real. Backstage, adrenaline still buzzing, Taehyung leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I almost froze, he admitted. But you didn't, Jungkook said. You chose. Later that night, alone again, Taehyung sat by his window, city lights blinking like distant stars. The path ahead felt fractured and dangerous. But for the first time since the red carpet, he wasn't reacting. He was deciding. At 3 in the morning, an email notification glowed on his phone. An invitation to an international cultural forum, live audience, global broadcast, unfiltered Q&A. Taehyung laughed softly. They really don't learn. Across the room, Jungkook looked up. What is it? Taehyung read it aloud. Jungkook whistled. That's not an invitation, that's a trap. I know, Taehyung said, then quieter, but if I don't go, they'll say I ran. Jungkook watched him carefully. If you do this, it won't just be about you anymore. It never was, Taehyung replied. Backstage at the forum, the lights were blinding, erasing shadows, leaving nowhere to hide. Taehyung stood still, mic clipped to his jacket, heart pounding in his throat. A staffer whispered, "You can still walk away." I know, Taehyung said. When his name was announced, the applause was scattered but sharp. He walked out anyway. The questions started safe. Art, influence, responsibility. He answered calmly, choosing each word with care. Then the tone shifted. Do you believe your recent actions harmed the industry that gave you a platform? A man asked from the front row. Taehyung took a breath. I believe the industry is harmed when silence is mistaken for professionalism. Murmurs spread. Another voice cut in. Are you saying those who don't speak out are complicit? I'm saying everyone chooses their own survival strategy, Taehyung replied. Mine happens to be honesty. Applause burst from one side of the room, boos from another. The moderator tried to intervene, but the tension was already alive. With respect, a panelist said, some feel your stance encourages instability. Taehyung smiled slowly. Whose stability? The room went still. For some of us, he continued, anger is labeled danger, and that says more about power than professionalism. Backstage, Jungkook held his breath as Taehyung finished. The applause this time was undeniable. Afterward, in a quiet hallway, Taehyung leaned against the wall, legs trembling now that the adrenaline faded. You didn't just survive, Jungkook said softly. You took control of the room. Taehyung laughed shakily. I was terrified. I know, Jungkook replied. You did it anyway. The backlash came within hours. Another sponsor pulled out. Then another. Taehyung read every statement, face pale but steady. Say the word, Jungkook said. We'll shut everything down. Taehyung shook his head. If I stop now, it proves them right. That night, alone in his apartment, the weight finally hit him. He slid down the wall and cried, shoulders shaking, exhaustion and fear crashing together. Jungkook sat beside him without speaking, offering presence instead of solutions. I hate that being honest hurts this much, Taehyung whispered. Jungkook answered quietly, truth always costs something. That's why people avoid it. Taehyung closed his eyes, breathing through the ache. Whatever came next, he knew one thing. The message arrived just after dawn, lighting up Taehyung's phone like a dare. He had barely slept. The city outside his window was quiet in that brief hour before traffic returned, before opinions woke up hungry again. He stared at the notification, thumb hovering, a familiar knot tightening in his chest. Unknown number. He opened it. The words were polite on the surface, carefully constructed, but the intent underneath was unmistakable. Mentions of connections, of influence, of how situations like this usually ended when people didn't know when to step back. No direct threats, nothing actionable, just enough to be understood. Taehyung's hands went cold. Jungkook was already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter with untouched coffee, scrolling through his phone like he was bracing for impact. He looked up immediately. "What is it?" Taehyung handed him the phone, without a word. Jungkook read the message once, then again, his jaw tightened. "He thinks you'll fold." Taehyung let out a slow breath. "He thinks I'll get tired." "That too," Jungkook said. "They always count on that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in with the weight of unspoken consequences. Taehyung had been warned his entire career about moments like this, about lines you weren't supposed to cross, about how easily doors could close if you forgot your place. He thought about the red carpet, the smirk, the assumption that proximity mattered more than effort. "Don't respond," Jungkook said carefully. "Not yet." Taehyung nodded. He wasn't sure what responding would even look like. By noon, the internet had shifted again. Screenshots of his forum answers circulated alongside think pieces questioning his emotional stability. Clips were slowed down, analyzed frame by frame, his tone debated like a moral failing. And threaded through it all was Jungkook's name, pulled into conversations that weren't his to carry. "They're trying to isolate you," Jungkook said quietly as they watched the coverage together. "Turn this into a you problem." Taehyung's phone buzzed again. This time it was his agency. Emergency meeting, in person. The boardroom felt colder than before. Same long table, same controlled expressions, different stakes. The CEO sat at the head, fingers steepled, eyes unreadable. "This has escalated," he began. "Sponsors are withdrawing, partners are uneasy." Taehyung met his gaze. "Because I told the truth." "Because you disrupted the narrative," another executive corrected. "This industry survives on control." "And who controls it?" Taehyung asked. No one answered. "We need to contain this," the CEO continued. "A public clarification, a softer tone, distance from further commentary." Taehyung leaned back in his chair. "You want me quiet. We want you safe." "No," Taehyung said evenly. "You want me manageable." The silence that followed was sharp. "If you continue this path," the CEO said at last, "there will be consequences we can't shield you from." Taehyung stood. "You already are." Outside, rain had finally started to fall, thin and relentless. Jungkook waited by the car, watching Taehyung's face as he approached. "They're done pretending," Jungkook said. "So am I," Taehyung replied. That night, alone again, Taehyung stared at the message from the unknown number. He thought about deleting it, about blocking the sender and letting the silence swallow it whole. Instead, he took a screenshot. No commentary, no caption, no explanation. He posted it. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The internet caught fire in minutes. Journalists began digging. Names surfaced. Patterns emerged. Stories that had been whispered for years suddenly found daylight. Messages flooded in from people he'd never met, sharing eerily similar experiences. The narrative shifted again, this time beyond his control in a way that felt different, bigger. By morning, outlets were calling it a reckoning. Jungkook watched it unfold from Taehyung's living room, phone buzzing nonstop. "You just changed the rules," he said quietly. Taehyung didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed, raw, like he'd ripped off a layer of protection he might never get back. "I didn't plan this," Taehyung said. "Movements never are," Jungkook replied. That afternoon, Taehyung stepped onto his balcony, the city stretching endlessly below. For the first time since the red carpet, his phone was silent. No notifications, no demands, just air and distance and the hum of life continuing. "I'm scared of what comes next," he admitted. Jungkook stood beside him, hands resting on the railing. "So am I." He glanced at Taehyung. "But I'd rather be scared with you than comfortable pretending nothing's wrong." Taehyung smiled faintly, something steady settling beneath the fear. Somewhere in the city, offices were scrambling. Statements were being rewritten. Power was shifting in quiet, uncomfortable ways. And the man who had spoken too freely on a red carpet was discovering that some fires didn't burn out. They spread. The retaliation didn't arrive all at once. It never did. It came in pieces, small enough to be denied individually, sharp enough to hurt when added together. A scheduled magazine cover quietly disappeared from the calendar. A brand collaboration stopped returning emails. An overseas appearance was postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. Each message was polite, regretful, and unmistakably final. Taehyung watched it happen with a strange calm. He had expected anger, panic. Instead, there was a hollow steadiness, like standing in the center of a storm after the wind had already torn through. Jungkook noticed it first. "You're dissociating," he said gently one evening as they sat on the floor, backs against the couch. "I'm adapting," Taehyung replied. "That's not the same thing." Taehyung didn't argue. He couldn't. Because part of him knew Jungkook was right. There were moments now when his phone buzzed and his body reacted before his mind did, muscles tensing, breath catching, as if bracing for impact. Publicly, support continued to grow. Fans organized campaigns. Artists from other industries spoke out carefully, threading solidarity through cautious language. Headlines praised his bravery, his integrity, his fearlessness. Privately, the cost kept climbing. One afternoon, Taehyung received a call from an old producer he trusted, someone who had always spoken to him plainly. "I'm not supposed to tell you this," the man said quietly, "but rooms are closing when your name comes up, not because they think you're wrong, because they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" Taehyung asked. "Of precedent." After the call ended, Taehyung stared at the blank screen, the word echoing in his mind. Precedent. Proof that silence wasn't the only way to survive. That night, Jungkook found him in the studio room, sitting in the dark with the keyboard untouched. "You haven't written in days," Jungkook said. "I don't know who I'm writing for anymore," Taehyung admitted. Jungkook sat beside him. "For yourself." Taehyung let out a humorless laugh. "That's expensive." "So is lying," Jungkook replied. The next blow came unexpectedly. A respected senior figure gave an interview, never mentioning Taehyung by name, but speaking about younger artists who confuse emotional outbursts with integrity. The implication was obvious. The clip went viral within hours. Taehyung watched it once. Then again, something inside him cracked, sharp and sudden. "So now I'm unstable," he said quietly. Jungkook clenched his fists. "They're trying to rewrite you." "And it's working," Taehyung replied. "People love a fall from grace." The following week, Taehyung was removed from an upcoming ensemble project. The official reason cited creative restructuring. No apology, no explanation. That was the night he broke. He didn't cry at first. He just sat on the floor, back against the bed, staring at nothing while the weight finally caught up to him. Jungkook knelt in front of him, voice low, steady. "Say it," Jungkook said, "whatever you're thinking." "I think I ruined everything," Taehyung whispered. "Not just for me, for you, for the group, for everyone who trusted me to be easy." Jungkook shook his head. You didn't ruin anything, you exposed it. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, Jungkook agreed, it doesn't. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that came after truth had been spoken aloud. Days later, something unexpected happened. A handwritten letter arrived at Taehyung's apartment. No return address. Inside were pages filled with careful, deliberate writing. It was from a trainee he'd never met, thanking him for speaking up, for making it possible to imagine a future where dignity didn't require silence. Taehyung read it 3 times. More letters followed, emails, messages rooted through friends, stories from people who had endured the same quiet humiliations, the same threats dressed up as advice. The movement had a heartbeat now. At a small, private showcase weeks later, Taehyung stepped onto a modest stage. No broadcast, no sponsors, just a room full of people who had chosen to be there. Before performing, he spoke. "I was told that what I did would end my career," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Maybe it will change it, but if the price of staying is silence, I'd rather leave loudly." The applause that followed was raw and unfiltered, echoing off bare walls. Backstage, Jungkook pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. "That," he said, "was you." Taehyung smiled, small but real. For the first time in weeks, the knot in his chest loosened. The industry hadn't softened. The punishments hadn't stopped. But something fundamental had shifted. Taehyung no longer felt like he was reacting to forces beyond him. He was choosing his ground. Late that night, scrolling through the quiet after the show, Taehyung saw a breaking news alert. An investigation had been launched into the figure linked to the anonymous message. Others were being named, carefully, cautiously, but publicly. He set the phone down and closed his eyes. The red carpet felt like a lifetime ago now, a single moment that had cracked open a system built on polished silence. He didn't know what his career would look like a year from now, or 5. But he knew this. He had stopped running, and whatever came next would be face standing still. Time didn't heal things the way people promised it would. It rearranged them. Months after the red carpet, Taehyung woke up to quieter mornings. No frantic schedules. No constant negotiation between who he was and who the industry preferred him to be. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, almost threatening, like a stage with the lights off. He learned how to sit in it. The investigations moved slowly, deliberately. Names surfaced, then disappeared from conversations that once treated them as untouchable. Some consequences were public. Others happened behind closed doors, felt more than seen. Taehyung followed the updates from a distance, refusing to let them define his days. Jungkook stayed close, not out of obligation but out of choice. Their conversations shifted, less about damage control and more about possibility, about what creating could look like without permission. "You're lighter," Jungkook said one afternoon as they walked along the river, the city reflecting itself in broken patterns across the water. Taehyung considered it. "I think I stopped carrying things that were never mine." The industry adjusted as it always did. New faces filled old spaces. New narratives replaced uncomfortable ones. Publicly, Taehyung became a symbol, a reference point. Privately, he was still a person learning how to exist without armor. Invitations returned slowly. Different now, smaller, more honest. He accepted some, declined others without explanation. The power imbalance hadn't vanished, but it had shifted just enough for him to feel it. At a cultural conference overseas, a moderator asked him what he would do differently. Taehyung smiled faintly. "I would have rested sooner, but I wouldn't have stayed quiet longer." The room was silent for a beat, then applause rose unforced. Later, alone in his hotel room, Taehyung replayed the red carpet in his mind, not with anger but with clarity. He saw himself standing there, composed, unaware that everything was about to change. He didn't wish he could go back. One night months later, Jungkook joined him in the studio. No cameras, no expectations, just sound and space. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. When the track ended, Taehyung leaned back, eyes closed. I forgot what this felt like. Jungkook smiled, free. True, Taehyung replied. The song they recorded that night wasn't meant for charts or statements. It wasn't an answer to anyone. It was proof that creation could exist without defense. Fans heard it later eventually when Taehyung decided to release it quietly without promotion. It spread anyway, slowly, organically, like something real. The comments weren't about controversy anymore. They were about recognition, about feeling seen. On the anniversary of the red carpet, Taehyung didn't post anything. He spent the day walking, breathing, letting the past stay where it belonged. In the evening, he stood on his balcony again, the same city below, unchanged and different all at once. Jungkook joined him, handing him a drink, still scared. Taehyung nodded, sometimes. Jungkook clinked his glass gently against his. Good, means you care. Taehyung watched the lights flicker across the skyline. Fear hadn't disappeared, neither had doubt, but they no longer controlled him. The industry would move on, stories always did. But some moments stayed. Not because they were loud, but because they were honest. Taehyung took a slow breath, feeling the weight of his name settle comfortably back onto his shoulders. No longer a burden, no longer a shield. Just his.